This past Saturday, October the 7th, the world woke up to some horrific news coming out of Israel. 1,000 roughly Hamas fighters broke out of the open-air prison that has caged them for the past 17 years, overrun some Israeli military outposts, captured several small towns and cities around the Gaza perimeter, killed at least 900 both civilians and army soldiers, and took about 100 hostages back into the Gaza Strip. I want to make it clear that I unequivocally condemn the killing of civilians, whether it be conducted by Hamas, whether it be conducted by Israel, or any group of freedom fighters anywhere in the world. There is no justification for the killing of innocent civilians. But predictably, Israel has responded in the only way they know how. And that is basically a carpet bombing of innocent people in the Gaza Strip. Keep in mind, the Gaza Strip is essentially roughly 141 square miles. That's about 30 miles long by 6 or 7 miles wide at its widest point. 2.2 million people live in the Gaza Strip. 50% of them are under the age of 18. Out of that 2.2 million, a lot of them would not be supportive of Hamas, certainly not supportive of the killings that took place. But typical response from Israel is they need to exact some revenge for what happened, and the way they do that is by carpet bombing the most densely populated city on the planet.
Where do you see this going?
I mean, look, there's all these pronouncements about the need that they're going to do everything they can to avoid civilian casualties. It is really worth emphasizing here that Israel has bombed Gaza many, many times before, and Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, and even Israeli human rights organizations like B'Tselem, say that this is not at all what Israel's conduct is. There isn't an effort to minimize civilian casualties, that there is mass indiscriminate bombing of civilian areas. And frankly, we're watching that unfold right now as well. The policy is essentially to punish the entire Palestinian population, cutting off electricity to all of Gaza, preventing anybody in Gaza from coming in and out. This is an act of collective punishment. And this is exactly the trajectory that we unfortunately are on. I think what we're going to see is much greater death that's going to cover the entire Gaza Strip. And at the end of it, Palestinians are going to remain a population that is captive and under an illegal siege, as recognized by the UN. And we're only setting ourselves up towards another round of this in the future. What we need right now is the world community to come together and start dealing with this issue seriously, understanding that this policy of giving Israel a carte blanche to behave however it wants towards Palestinians is not a way to actually achieve long-lasting peace. You can't keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. The one thing that has not been tried so far is allowing Palestinians to be free of Israeli occupation and military dictatorship. And until we start taking Palestinian grievances seriously, until Israel starts seeing Palestinians as equal human beings who are deserving of the same human rights and decency and dignity that Israelis enjoy, I'm afraid we're going to be stuck in this situation for a very, very long time.
Omar Badar, thank you for joining us this morning.
In addition, the Minister of Defense has incredulously said we are going to lay siege to Gaza. And by that, he's indicated that there would be no food, no medical supplies, no water, no fuel for electricity going into the Gaza Strip. This is the actions of medieval times. This is genocide, is what he's basically saying he is about to commit. In fact, he's already implemented that policy.
While I recognize Israel's legitimate security concerns, I also remind Israel that military operations must be conducted in strict accordance with international humanitarian law. Civilians must be respected and protected at all times. Civilian infrastructure must never be a target. And we already have reports of Israeli missiles striking health facilities inside Gaza, as well as multi-storied residential towers and a mosque. I am deeply distressed by today's announcement that Israel will initiate a complete siege of the Gaza Strip, nothing allowed in, no electricity, food, or fuel. The humanitarian situation in Gaza was extremely dire before these hostilities. Now it will only deteriorate exponentially. This most recent violence does not come in a vacuum. The reality is that it grows out of a long-standing conflict with a 56-year-long occupation and no political end in sight. It's time to end this vicious circle of bloodshed, hatred, and polarization. Israel must see its legitimate needs for security materialized, and Palestinians must see a clear perspective for the establishment of their own state realized.
Now, Netanyahu, he has basically said that he is going to change the face of the Middle East. And he issued a dystopian warning to the people of Palestine that they better leave the Gaza Strip. Now, where are they supposed to go? They're completely caged in, as they've been for the past 17 years, with the ocean on one side, Egypt on the other side, and Israel controlling all the exits in and out of Gaza. So really what he's basically saying, if you understand his language, he is talking about a second Nakba. The Nakba basically is the thing that ethnically cleansed Palestinians from their homes in 1947.
This conflict actually began over a century ago, with the birth of the Zionist movement, a movement of European Jews who aimed to create a Jewish majority state in Palestine. With help from the British Empire, the Zionists massacred their way through Palestinian villages, kicking the indigenous Arabs out and moving European Jews in, establishing the State of Israel. This was the only way the reality-defying concept of a Jewish-only state in the heart of the Arab world could be created, through outright ethnic cleansing. After its founding, Israel turned Palestine into a virtual prison state out of fear of a mass Palestinian uprising. In the West Bank, Arabs live as second-class citizens under a completely different set of laws as Jews. Palestinians are relegated to Arab-only roads and Arab-only schools. Palestinians have one kind of ID while Jews have another. Palestinians have to request permission to travel virtually anywhere.
Now, you know what the Palestinian people have been asking for. Far less even than some people would ask for. Because I believe the whole apartheid system should be dismantled. But what they've asked for is to lift the siege of Gaza. Just to lift the siege of Gaza. Let them have an airport. Let them have ports. Let them not be dictated to by a government for whom they do not vote as to what can go in and out of their territories, whether they will have power, whether they will have clean water, whether they will have medicine. What makes you think you're allowed to have nuclear weapons and the fourth biggest army in the world and visit destruction on the people of Gaza, but they have no right to defend themselves? They have no territorial sovereignty over that land.
Would you ask questions, please?
How do you justify that?
Yeah. All right.
How do you justify those double standards? And very lastly, Ambassador, people like Bishop Tutu, Nelson Mandela, and I would certainly describe your state as a apartheid state, with different laws for people depending on their race or religion. Now, isn't that just the case that, for example, at checkpoints going into the West Bank, there's a channel if you're Israeli or European, and there's a channel if you're Arab. Just because you're Arab. If you came into Dáil Éireann and they stopped you and said, "Are you Jewish?" "Oh no, sorry, you can't come in through the same entrance as Irish people or European people because you're Jewish," you would call that racism and apartheid. But yet, you practice that with your checkpoints and your military barriers and your apartheid wall. How can you justify that?
The Nakba of 1947 created 750,000 Palestinian refugees. Make no mistake about it, what Netanyahu is basically saying today is that he will ethnically cleanse the Gaza Strip. When you talk about bombing, carpet bombing, the most densely populated city in the entire world, where there is no escape, and he says he's going to turn it into rubble, there will be no place left for Palestinians. And that, my friends, is the ultimate goal here. of Netanyahu. He wants to basically get rid of Palestinians out of Palestine.
But the real scandal here is that this is every bit as horrific as it is predictable and preventable. A lot of people are talking about this as an intelligence failure, but I think there's a much more fundamental failure of common sense, that you can put millions of Palestinians under indefinite military occupation and a system of apartheid as recognized by every major human rights organization in the world, where Israel commits daily war crimes against Palestinians everywhere, land theft, lack of access to water, dropping bombs indiscriminately on civilian areas, and to think that this is a situation that's not going to eventually lead to an explosion is absolutely insane. This is absolutely predictable. We were obviously heading towards eventually a disaster of this kind, and now all of this direction towards further militarism and further violence is obviously not going to lead to anything better, because that is exactly the track that got us here. I think that is absolutely correct. We need a real, meaningful solution to the underlying injustice that drives this violence, and that has to mean that Palestinians get to live free of Israeli control and occupation.
As you can see, Palestinians are second-class citizens in their own country. People can fly from anywhere in the world, land in Israel, and be accepted as a citizen of that country. But Palestinians have lived there all of their lives. Some of them expelled from their homes. They are not allowed to have the same rights as basically strangers coming in from somewhere else in the world. So people ask, so what is the solution to this problem? Well, the solution is clear. It's allow the Palestinians to be free. Allow them to have their own country. Allow them to be sovereign in their own nation. I mean, failing a two-state solution, which with all of the illegal Jewish settlements that we now have all across the West Bank and in East Jerusalem, it is highly unlikely that you're going to be able to get a two-state solution. So the solution becomes a one-state secular state. What else can there be? Where the Arabs and the Jews live side by side with equal rights. It cannot be like the Minister of Defense called the Palestinians human animals. This is what leads to the crisis that we're in today. When you start to think that other human beings are lesser than what you are, then you think that they're like animals. Well, then obviously you're going to treat them like animals, and that's what exactly happens at all of these checkpoints and road checks, and just the way on a regular basis, illegal settlers are allowed to come in and commit acts of violence against Palestinians in their own homes, kicking them out of their homes, demolishing their homes, blowing their homes up. When you have that kind of a system in place, you get what happened last Saturday. So the solution is to free the Palestinians and then work out what that looks like. Is that going to be a one-state or a two-state solution? And if it's a two-state solution, then Israel better be prepared to remove those 700,000 illegal settlers from every aspect of the West Bank. That's the crisis that we're in, and that's what the solution is. But the Israelis believe they can do what they did in the past and bomb the Palestinians into submission. Well, I've got news for the Israelis. There's not a nation on the planet, there is not a race of people on the planet that has ever given in to their oppressors. Everybody eventually breaks free. And I'm speaking from experience. Ireland was occupied for hundreds of years by the Brits, and we eventually got our freedom. There's still 6 counties to be freed, but that will eventually come. And it'll come as well for the Palestinians. There's no doubt in my mind. At some point, Palestine will be free.